Hey, Big Bizzers! Welcome to Big Biz, the show that empowers your small business. I am still your host, Billy Bukako, and today I am coming to you from the Mapungube Gallery of the University of Pretoria. My guest today is Mr. Uthando Baduza, and we will be discussing the business of art. So whether you are a sculptor, you are into tapestry, entertainment art, or literature, or even a practitioner in the arts, this is your episode. We're still sponsored by Fertility for this season, so stick around because later on in the show we'll be sharing information on how you can stay powering your business with incredible prizes from Fertility. Come with me. My dear friend, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm actually quite excited as well. I mean, with your wealth of experience, I know everyone, even you at home, are in for a treat today. So let's get right into it. Maybe tell us a little bit more about, who you are. I obviously know that, but, about your roles and, specifically your role within the arts and how that interfaces with entrepreneurship.
Well, obviously now I'm the curator for art exhibitions and galleries at the University of Pretoria. But prior to that, I've served in a number of roles. I think the most recent being at the chief curator of the Red Location Art Gallery, and there we work very hard to ensure that the artists that we work with can have an entrepreneurial spirit. I think we were very focused on ensuring that we capacitate artists so that they can, provide for themselves and encouraging sort of sustainable livelihoods. So that has always been our approach to say, once they walk away from our programs, what are they walking away with, and how have we enriched their practice, as well as being really putting rands into their pockets.
Yeah, I think with arts being very wide, right, you get different forms of art, and your role within the Red Location Museum, which is something that I followed, your journey through that. Mm-hmm. Maybe take us through some of the programs that you guys, had as part of that program, and what sorts of art forms, were you focusing on?
I think with the closure of the actual buildings, the Red Location Cultural Precinct, it really forced us to think quite innovatively about what the kind of work we do. So the buildings are closed. So how do we then make sure that we continue the work of delivering museum and gallery services to the people? So what we did, we conceived of a program called Precinct Without Walls, and as part of that program, we developed a lot of projects. I think one of the flagship projects that we did was called Sketchbook Visual Art Project, which primarily worked with visual artists. And in that, we called it an in-house residency, where we take artists through a program of exposing them to as many different art forms or methods of making art. And so it's about medium, it's about introducing them to materials, and understanding also how to price your work, how do you prepare works for exhibitions. So we really took them through sort of an exhibition making process. But that's just one of the programs. But also, I think as we also were very much focused, or as particularly my keen interest was working with crafters in the city. So this is where the entrepreneurial sort of spirit really came through, where we really wanted to ensure that we focus not just on getting them ready for the market in terms of how do you handle a business, how do you open a bank account, how do you keep books, but also product development. So looking at what are they are making and linking it to the markets that the products are being made for.
That is actually quite interesting. I think you talked about different media, right, that you expose artists to. You talk about sculptors and crafters and all of that. And I think for all of us, art is different. When you talk about art to somebody else, performance pops up. You talk about art, painting pops up. With all these different art forms, what does the ecosystem, the art ecosystem look like? Who are some of the major players, especially when it relates to entrepreneurship?
I think, obviously, if you want to think of it, it's very difficult to have a sort of a monolithic understanding of the ecosystem in terms of the arts because of the different specialized natures of the thing. But I think in broad terms, you have the artist at the very core. So the producer of the work, whether it's a play or a book, you need to be able to produce a product for I guess what you call the market, to us consumers. And then obviously, if you're trying to look at the ecosystem, then the next step is how do you get your artwork out there. In fact, even before you get to product, you must think of concept. So those are the kind of the steps. So it's the concept, it's the product, and then how are you getting that output there. It doesn't matter whether you're a playwright, you're an author, you're an artist. You have a concept, you have something that you want to share with the world, a creative concept, and then you make it. So the process of making is also quite a critical component because it adds all of the systems. Because if you're looking at performance, you have to rent rehearsal space. So those spaces will be part of that ecosystem. You have to hire equipment. So there's all these sort of support secondary economy that underpins a lot of creative work, because a lot of the products that are done by artists require some sort of secondary input into making sure that the product is realized.
Yeah. So would you say this ecosystem is well organized? I think you as a practitioner who's already in the ecosystem can give a view in terms of, what would you like to see change? Is it well organized? Are there any improvements in the different nodes of the ecosystem that we can ramp up to ensure that, support into the artists and, the businesses is of the highest level?
I think we need to, for me, to make stronger linkages with this around the ecosystem, because I think oftentimes, interventions within the creative sector have very much come with models that are very economic in focus, without really understanding the creative process. So you have this sort of value chain approach that often comes to say, okay, who are the players in the value chain? And in the creative field, it's not as linear, because it always depends on the process of the concept and then how you get it to the market in a way. So I think for me, what becomes important in trying to understand the creative ecosystem, we have to be flexible in our approaches, and the models that we use in trying to understand are sensitive to sort of this dynamic nature of the thing. Because I can get one material from you, I can get a material from someone else, but it doesn't mean that each time I do this, a product is going to be the same. For the next project, my ecosystem might completely change because of the type of nature of the product that I'm doing. So I think we tend to think or box creative processes into that it's going to function in a similar way, but it's never that way. So we have to just understand for me, what becomes more critical in that, how do we create a conducive environment for that ecosystem, so that artists are able to then tap into these different resources in order to realize their creative output.
That's actually quite interesting. So I am a practitioner in the ESD, which is Enterprise Supply Development space, and you are a practitioner in the arts, right? And with all these different dynamics that you're coming with, in terms of the ecosystem not being linear, it definitely does need people that are not generalists, in nature. But I know that you have been able to go, to have some contribution in different art forms. What does that take, as a practitioner, in order for you to have such, a valuable input in different art forms when you are not even the specialist in some of them?
I think it goes back to this notion of understanding the creative process, because I think what you can generalize about is the creative process. Is that whatever, you're a playwright, you're an author, you're an artist, you're a musician, you have a concept. You need to think okay, I'm thinking about creating a work that speaks about one thing. That is the concept, and then how then do you realize that that concept becomes the work of this ecosystem? I think for me, I've been quite lucky because I've worked across different disciplines. I think that has enabled me then to have this sort of bird's eye view of understanding that, through experience, and it's not something that's immediately evident, but through experience you realize actually there is a process that one can understand, but I think it's more organic. And often I think some of the models we use in trying to measure impact, measure indicators on all of that kind of economic speak sort of doesn't understand that these processes are often very organic and particular. But I think for me, as I keep saying, is that we need to create an environment where one is able, or the ecosystem is able to sustain this creative process. And I think we need to then look at how we put instruments in place to be enable this ecosystem to be responsive to the often dynamic nature of the sector. Because I mean, if you look at I can use the example of COVID and how it impacted the sector. We moved from having venue-based productions or performances or exhibitions, but the sector was quite innovative in the response, because I mean, if you look at the online space, it has really impacted on how we operate now as an added component in the creative process, where you're saying, okay, this is what I'm doing, how can it live and be experienced by others that are not necessarily in the space, but in other parts of the country and the world, really.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a word that is often, I mean, the key word in the show, innovation, innovative models, innovative processes, right? And with the differences in the type of entrepreneurs that you would be expected to support, right? How is it key to find the one with the X factor? And how do you then identify and support those entrepreneurs that are pushing the boundaries? It could be in any art form.
I think for me, the X factor is a hard thing to measure. I mean, but you see it as one of those things that you don't know what it is, but when you see it, you know.
Yeah.
But this one has got an X factor. This is it. And I think part of the thing is that you have to have obviously an inherent talent, whatever art form it is, that sort of sets you apart from the rest. And I think what is critical in that is that we have to create an environment where then that talent is supported. And I think most artists, I wouldn't think that they will see themselves as entrepreneurs in a sort of the traditional sense, or how it's understood in terms of how it's often talked about. But I think that there is a very much, if you're seeing the artists that are being successful, yes, you have the X factor, but you are able to, have a well-oiled machine, in the sense that you are able to, package your product in such a way that it's one is accessible and is attractive to the market and the consumer, the ones that us will watch the play, who will read the book, who will go to the exhibition, because you are responding to something that people want.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can write a book, but are people going to read it?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the people that have been successful have written books that demonstrate enormous talent, but yet also they've been quite savvy in terms of how they've positioned themselves to say, look, I have this product, I have this play, but being able to exploit their networks on the one. I think in the sector, that's another thing that I think is critical, is how are you plugging into the networks that are already there, but also you are getting the product out.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination thing, and I think what I'm seeing also is just this advent of how people are deploying technology, particularly to get their products out. I mean, if you look at, a lot of artists now would have some sort of online presence, where a few years ago, most artists were like, very, very, very established you putting you sort of cheapening the art.
Yeah.
But now it's a prerequisite. It's like people like, where can you find you? Where can you find your product? Where? So it's just the dynamic nature of the sector and how technology has shifted the sector in ways that now we are still trying to make sense of. And I mean, with also the advent of AI, a lot of artists are against this, saying, it's going to cheapen, the artistic practice, we can't be, but in my view is that we need to embrace these technologies so that we can create new interesting art forms that haven't really been seen before.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that you mentioned, AI. It's a conversation I was having with the crew earlier on around, AI in the arts, because, if you were to look at the entertainment arts, and AI could definitely enhance that experience, and performance and all of that. But if you look at things like your painting, somebody coming and saying, I want a 2024 version of the Mona Lisa, and put it onto an AI machine and it generates that, that could be seen otherwise, But what other technological advancement have enhanced, new age artist experience?
I think, I think our understanding of AI, for me personally, I think most recently I had the opportunity to be part of a program run by the French Ministry in Paris. And we were exposed to a lot of these technologies, which were, and they're the different types. So it's not just AI. You have virtual reality, immersive experiences, and we saw some interesting examples of how artists are using these technologies to tell a very interesting stories. One that sort of really sort of stuck to me was an artist from Kenya, and she was telling her story of being a migrant in Europe, and her experiences of how she had to navigate this new environment. And it was a sort of a virtual reality and immersive experience.
Storytelling.
So there's a lot of them, and I think in Europe, obviously, there's a lot of work that has been done, but also in Africa, there's a lot of work that's being done to tell these stories, because our youth now are interested in these technologies.
Yeah.
So how can we adapt our stories so that they are not lost? Because the danger in sort of resisting these technologies, they get lost. I think that there's also ways that we can generate revenue from these technologies, because imagine the stories of being accessible, and people being able to put on those goggles and experience the different stories, different narratives, which don't really have a space within our institutions. So there's I think for me there's a lot of potential, and we've seen it, and even here in South Africa, there we saw a very interesting work by one of the winners of a poetry slam, Xabiso Vili. He did an immersive experience with using a so-called room, and sort of talking about the tree of life, how Africa is the source of life, and now narrating the stories, and how this mythology of the African tree of life plays out in different parts of Africa, which was amazing. So it's a very important heritage component, but also you're experiencing it in a very interesting way in terms of these technologies.
That's actually quite interesting. You mentioned earlier on that generally artists would not see themselves as entrepreneurs, right? Because I think it's their way of life. I have to make this artwork and I have to sell it. But then if you look at that whole, value chain, there is, the journey of an entrepreneur. In your view, how important is it for artists to view themselves as entrepreneurs?
I think it's critical. It's critical. I think we've been trying a lot through our programs, to ensure to get that. And I think it was only Nati when we saw the need, initially we were very much focused on the products, the skills, make sure that the artist walks away with materials and the skill to be able to then create the product. But we will soon realize that actually there's a gap here. Some artists, there have been various interventions by other government agencies where, the new venture capital creation and all those interventions. But often those interventions do not understand the dynamics of this ecosystem that I was referring to. So actually, you know what, we need to have sessions around, like a simple thing about just registering as a business, maintaining a bank account, separating your personal finances from
the business finances.
Like simple things. So, and it's not a question of, setting up. I think all of these inventions also talk about, you have to create a business plan. And often that is, artists are like, I don't know anything about business plans. I create, market research and all of those things. And which often sounds like foreign to a lot of artists. But I think if these interventions and these models understand the context in which most artists work, I think we will have a more meaningful intervention, because you're talking about ensuring that, look guys, this is how you're supposed to manage your finances and take them seriously. And you're seeing it a lot with the younger artists. I must say that a lot of them are quite astute when it comes to their finances and also the valuing of their time. I think that's another thing that I've seen with a lot of young artists. Be like, actually, you need to pay me to do certain things. And I like that, because then there's a certain understanding. But I'm a going concern. I'm a business.
Yes, I am the business.
I am the business. Yes. And therefore, I have to be mindful of how I use my time effectively, so that I can generate income. So I think that there is has been a shift, but I think it's not. I think there's more work to be done to get artists to that level to say. Because I was just thinking about it this morning. A lot of the time, artists would prefer to work to a company. If you think of actors, dancers, who belong to a company and would be salaried employees. So we need to educate. So I think our artists to say, look, actually, one, you need to conceive of yourself as a business, you're an SMME actually yourself as a person, and often because there's a lack of understanding that yes, when I believe you might be the artist, but there's a lot of people around you that have to assist you, that have to work with you, that will make your dream be realized. So if you are doing a song, you still need a producer, you still need studio time. So there's all these things that often is a big shock to artists when they get into the space of being. So I think that there has been some positive initiatives around.
That's great.
Education, but I think it goes back to what I was saying, is that in terms of a more holistic approach, we have to devise instruments that are more flexible on the one hand,
and we'll talk about those instruments just now.
But also that are responsive of the context in which artists operate.
Yeah. So I understand that. We do say that some of these artists don't see themselves as businesses, but there are definitely some of those who see the value in operating as a going concern, looking at the self as the business, right? What are some of the constraints? I know some of constraints in business are universal, but what are some of those that are more nuanced towards the arts? Constraints for facing SMMEs in the space.
Often, I think in the art space, one of course is funding is the key issue, and I think for me it also is a question of education, because a lot of the training or skilling of artists happens in a very informal space. Then often these models or businesses require certification. I think certification is also an issue, because a lot of the you might have 10 years experience as a painter or whatever, a musician, but might not necessarily hold the certificate. And that is often a barrier in terms of the funding applications that you have to do. And also I think one of the barriers is the funding applications themselves. If you look at some of the criteria that is required, the documentation that is required, that is so onerous. And I understand, it's important, there's a lot of mismanagement of funds that we've seen in the sector, but yet I think we can be more responsible and more.
I think the biggest frustration is that it takes you the same amount of time to apply for R1 as it takes you to apply for R1,000,000, right?
Yes.
The same amount of paperwork, the same amount of frustration.
Exactly. And I think also some of these agencies have not been as responsive as we would like, especially the ones that are dedicated to the arts. And I think that is a problem. But I think what becomes important for me, if you're just talking about some of the constraints, is that you find that artists or the environment itself or the ecosystem that you keep referring to does not is not an enabling one for them to be able to see themselves as a business. I think.
And how do we make that ecosystem, responsive, anchoring, supportive, and create, because it's there to create an enabling and conducive environment for these artists. What do you think are some of the interventions? And you talked about some of these programs that, artists, there are programs, but these programs are not responsive, or, how do we, get that whole, system rolling?
I think for me, it's like we have a lot of pockets of good initiatives that are not upscaled enough. And it's not supported enough. And I think that's one of the biggest issues I think we're facing the sector, is that when good work isn't happening, it's very hard to sustain. You can have a great program for 5 years and then the money dries up. And then, often then the program closes, or it doesn't further happen. So it's a difficult, I think, question to answer, because there's so many of these things happening, but you don't see them reflected in a sustainable way. I think for me it becomes important also just to ensure that what we are seeing working is supported consistently. So that one is able to then upscale it into other areas, because it's always pockets. It's like you have a great program happening in Western Cape, in the Free State, in one or two projects that are happening, but without constant support, they become difficult to sustain.
Sure. And we see that in a lot of other sectors, right, where, there are programs, but they fall by the wayside, or programs don't necessarily do what they need to do or they're mandated to do. And usually we want to go back and look at what policy says, right? Are there any policy instruments that you think are conducive or enabling for this ecosystem to be able to have, programs that are sustainable?
I think, there's been some work and discussion, the arts have been, or the creative industries have been identified, of course, as one of the key economic drivers going forward for the country, coming through from the TTI process. But it's a question of also, adequate stakeholder engagement, adequate, understanding of the sector. Some of the instruments, we have also the revised white paper on arts, culture, heritage, and now libraries. But I think that there has been a sort of a lag in terms of the instruments, policy instruments that we have, and their implementation at various levels. I think that is the sort of gap that I can tell and see in that they obviously there's very good policy instruments, but translating them into action has been, I think, one of the challenges of the sector.
I see that a lot with, some of the work that we do, that you see, as you mentioned, the DTIC has the master plan or whatever, and then Department of Arts and Culture has something else. But then once you get to the policy coordination, because that's where the sweet spot is, and that's where we can really draw, real implementation. And we often find that, policy coordination is an issue. Would you say that's perhaps the issue with the arts?
Yes, I think, if you look at the revised white paper on arts and culture and heritage and libraries, that was recently has gone through various versions, and that in itself has been, I think, quite a hampering process, because it's taken years to get that white paper revised in a way that we then start get this policy coordination. It calls for various things, and it calls for this political sort of coordination between all tiers of government. But what this white paper has done, without us all realizing, is that it has put a lot of the implementation burden onto the local government. And I think, and that has, but all of this has not translated in one, policy coordination, just governance coordination between the tiers of government, but also it hasn't translated in the resources that are required at local level, because a lot of the implementation, if we read quite closely, it really rests on local government, and we are, that is the core face of these interventions, but it's not reflected in the resources that are allocated to local authorities. Also, it's not reflected in the engagement with local authorities. And I'll speak from my own experience. I don't know how it is in other areas, but I cannot remember a time where national government came to, except when the minister was around for one of his imbizos. But beyond that, in terms of us local officials talking to national officials and how we could work together, there was very little of that. At a local regional level, I mean, I do want to say that there was some level of engagement, but even then it was always on an ad hoc basis, not a sustained, because there is no direction and coordination at a sort of a holistic level. I don't want to say national, but I want to say at a holistic level.
That's actually quite interesting, because we know that government is now pushing the district ecosystem facilitation, right? Which talks to national, provincial, and if there's any implementing agencies of national governments would then come in, and then you would find then your local government, right? But then if you're missing all these other, spheres of government, I would imagine it does create a little bit of, a disjuncture.
No, it definitely does, but because the first step would be literally to have a meeting with all of these people. And in all the 10 years that I was in government, I don't recall one meeting that happened that spoke to how do we integrate programming, how do we align funding, how do we ensure that we are speaking the same language. It was only that kind of intervention or interaction was always an events-based kind of thing. If there's like a National Youth Day,
there's no continuity.
And that was always my thing, is that if we really want to see this kind of programming is critical. So we need to be supporting programs that will see that lasting impact on people, and we can also support people to be able to. I think because one of the other frustrations, because you're supposed to develop people, but then you still need to support them in a real way. You can't just develop people and then, okay, thank you, you've done this program now, good luck. So there's all of these things that need some better coordination, is that we develop, but also we need mentoring and support to be able to do this. But I think, artists are very resilient, innovative, by their very nature, they're very creative people, and they are very much have that vukuzenzele spirit. And I think when I was outside a lot of these institutions, I really adopted a build it and the money will come approach. And I think one of the other problems that I've seen especially now for having sat on the other side of the table, where you're assessing proposals or initiatives that people want to make, is that a lot of artists have this idea, and then it's like, okay, we want to work with 10 schools, to deliver this program, whatever it is, whether it be a literacy program or a music program, whatever it is. And then when you ask them, and then okay, cool, so have you spoken to the schools? No, we are going to. I'm like, I think that's also an important, and it comes with this education, upskilling thing I'm talking about, is to say, if you're gonna, ask for 250,000 million, best ensure that you have done the groundwork.
Yes,
and engaged, and started. And I think often one of the barriers, I think, is that this, or perceived barrier for me, is that you need to wait for money for things to happen, and often, yes, you do require some type of funds sometimes, but I think you can start the relationships. You can build this ecosystem you keep referring to. But okay, I'm going to be working with Billy and this other individual. These are the people that are programmed. This is I actually go to them and speak to them, and then we have a session. Who are the kids that we want to work with? Actually start the process, and then, because that's what becomes attractive to funders, because of the sort of volatile nature of the sector, is that no one is willing to fund a dream, but they are more likely to find a program.
That's already ongoing, right?
Or it has at least the structure or the infrastructure of it is in place. The advice I would give to artists, actually start the program.
Are there any existing programs? Because there's definitely a lot of artists that are disrupting the sector.
Yes.
Are there any programs? I know we did speak of the lack, but are there any ones that are currently in place that seek to,
Yes, as I said, there's pockets of excellence. I think, one example I could give, Business Arts South Africa is doing a lot of work in terms of, has a program, cultural producers program, internship programs that are happening left, right, and center. So there are programs that are happening to try to capacitate and ensure that producers or cultural producers or creative producers are getting the skills. So it's not to say that there isn't, but my thing is that it's how do we ensure that we upscale those interventions in a sustainable way, and so that they are able to have a wider impact. And I think there's also, for me, there's a need actually to do that.
That is actually quite interesting. So also interesting is that we saw that South Africa had a cultural trade deficit up to, I think, before 2020, right? And 2020 we started to see a surplus, even though it was disturbed a little bit because of COVID. But we've seen now an upward trend when it comes to that. It means that obviously our entrepreneurs are now, exporting more than we import, art products. What has contributed to that, surplus? What do you think are some of the interventions, from all the players, that have contributed to us being able to say we are no longer just consumers of the arts, but we're also producers, and exporters of the arts?
I would say, for me, technology has played a big role in that. It's really made the world smaller. You hear a song in South Africa, it's very easy to hear it in Miami the very next day. So the platforms that are in place for accessibility on some of these art forms has enabled some of that. And I think also, just there's been a very strong interest in South Africa and what we're producing. So that is often, and I think, people will be very surprised to know that a lot of our musicians are touring abroad all the time, in Europe, everywhere, in Australia, in America. Maybe not so much America, but definitely Europe, some pockets of America, and also I think, you know, some of these big celebrities have really also assisted in sort of shedding the spotlight on South Africa. You look at people like Trevor Noah, Shoma Josie. Shoma Josie is just touring all the time in Africa, especially. So there's various, South African standouts that have assisted in sort of shedding a light on South Africa, and as a result, you know, there's a huge appetite for what we produce, and which is not something that is really new. If you look at, you know, the history of Mamare Makeba, Mamole Tambuli,
the Hughes,
so they have also played a critical role in laying the groundwork for
and putting South Africa as the arts destination, right?
In Africa, yes.
In Africa. Would you say, I know this is more a technological, you know, advancement type of thing, would you put content creation as part of the cultural creative industries?
I would actually, because I think, you know, the content creators have done a lot of work in reflecting us to ourselves, and we've seen the really good ones have gone on to do many other things. And I think it's also a space for a creative expression. I think, you know, you can be your own star, as it were. But I think it's an important component of the landscape.
Where art and technology meet,
exactly.
That's where we find all this entertainment.
And I think it's also enabled even, you know, writers to have a voice that beyond the written page, you know. So I think content creation is a critical component of this makeup of what we refer as an artist entrepreneur. Because I think a lot of artists have a resistance to the word entrepreneur. It's like, oh my God, I have to write a business plan, as I was saying. But I think that
it's not realizing that your day to day and everything is, you're already there.
Exactly, because
it's just a label.
You know, that's what I always keep saying to artists, is that you cannot expect to sell artworks if you're not painting every day. You cannot expect to make for songs to be picked up if you're not making music every day. So it's also about practice. And this is why I always say that in programming then is the critical component, because you're not producing for an event, but you are producing so that you can ensure that you can generate a sustainable livelihood from your practice. Man.
You have been dropping a lot of golden nuggets, right, for policymakers, for practitioners. But as a seasoned practitioner in the space, you know, what other advice do you have for your peers who are pushing the entrepreneurship agenda within the arts, right, as well as the entrepreneurs who are watching today thinking that, you know, I've been thinking of myself as an artist, but I'm not just an artist, but I'm an artist who wants to sell my work?
Because what Josa said, I think for me, you can't call yourself an artist and not be able making art. It starts there. That is the genesis of it all. Is that you have to be before the money, before the bookkeeping, before the business plan. At the heart of it is that you have to understand your practice as an artist fundamentally. I think for me that is always the starting point. But what then makes you be able to then generate a livelihood from that is being dedicated to valuing your time and your resources and ensuring that you are learning. I think never stop learning, and that's what I always say to encourage other artists, that go to other performances, a dance show, a music show, even if you're a painter, but experience other art forms, learn about other things, so that you increase your knowledge base. Because I think what consumers are really looking for is works that have some conceptual underpinning. Sure. You can't fool the consumer. By submitting subpar work, but I want to be a singer, and you get up and sing. My piano example I think is a critical one, because if you see, not all the my piano people are winning. It's the people that have really invested time and energy in learning the craft, learning the market, learning the music. Even if they're saying hey the whole show, the whole song, but they've understood that this kind of sound, this kind of beat, this kind of,
it resonates with my target audience.
So I would say that we really need to have a thirst for knowledge, and for something that is not always so familiar to you, that would set you apart from the rest. And it will feed into your practice. So you have to be constantly learning, and not say that I've arrived.
So we may not be artists, but we are definitely consumers. We've got ears and we've got eyes, so you can't fool us. That is basically the advice from my friend Uthando Baduza. Thank you so much for coming to the show today.
It's been such a delight.
It's been really informative. There's a lot that I've learned, and I hope our viewers at home have learned a lot as well. Thank you. Well, big business, that's a wrap. I hope you've learned from our expert as much as I have. All I need for you to do now is to head on to our social media platforms, like our content, share it, and give us feedback. Also be mindful of our new YouTube channel, where you need to subscribe in order to get our content. Last but not least, we do have some incredible prizes for you. Head on to our website, www.bigbiz.africa. Go to our competitions page, follow all the instructions, and you could win incredible prizes from Motility that can power your business 24/7. See you next time on the Power Your Business segment, powered by Motility. This has been Big Biz, and my name is Billy Bukako. Thank you.